challenge in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
All right, everyone, we're here for another episode of the Fundraising AI Podcast, and we have a really incredible guest today, someone that I've actually been able to meet a few times now and just thoroughly enjoyed him as a human and as a leader in our industry and what he's done already and what he's bringing to the table. You are in for an absolute treat with a person on this call, not Scott Rosenkrantz, although you're just to push it way down there.
Thank you for the kind
Scott's
words.
here too, but you already know him. Randima Fernando is a co-founder of Center for Humane Technology, which goes by CHT. If you hear us reference CHT later in this podcast, it's an organization dedicated to promoting technology that aligns with human well-being and democratic values. We're going to talk a lot more about this because I know those are just words. I am a huge fan of CHT, the Center for Humane Technology. I talk about it, no kidding, all the time in sessions. I think I have a quote from Tristan in almost every presentation I do because it aligns so well with philanthropy and where we're at with AI and nonprofit. And so it's an absolute thrill to have you on this podcast, Randy, to join us for a little bit of time and share what will be a preview for a presentation that you are so generously providing your time with us at the Fundraising AI Summit on October 1st. So those that will listen to this podcast will get a sneak peek for what you're going to be talking about in a few weeks here at the Fundraising AI Global Summit. So welcome. All that to say, long introduction to say how much of a fan I am and to share my appreciation for you joining us today.
And thank you, Nathan, for the very warm introduction. Really glad to be here.
We're just thrilled to have you here. So why don't we start with, I know a lot of people on this call probably are not familiar with Center for Humane Technology. I know there are some that are because we've been talking about it on this podcast quite a bit, but you're a big part of that background. And I don't know if it's an equal portion of the background. I know there's a few of you that have come together and made this your life work and I think your legacy work. But let's start back a little bit further because I know you are this data wonk that goes back like to your early childhood. So why don't we start there? Like, let us know how you got into computers and data science and programming at an early age, and then how you came to this position where you're essentially running a nonprofit.
Yeah, sure. I was very lucky because my father was an electrical engineer. And so he loved hardware and computers, and we had a computer fairly early. And so growing up in the Philippines, I'm actually born in Sri Lanka, grew up in the Philippines, and I started programming early because he exposed me to that, right? So by 8, I had started doing that. I loved lighting up pixels on the screen. This was the thing that really fascinated me. There's so much feedback, right? Like when you code something and you run it and you see pixels light up on the screen, it's a beautiful form of like instant feedback, and it really drives you to keep going. So I loved that. And I ended up here in the United States for my computer science degree and then computer graphics. Then ended up at NVIDIA for 7 years doing product management. But I also was really interested, also at an early age, I learned mindfulness and meditation from my mother. And so after 7 years at NVIDIA, I was really interested in the nonprofit space, also having come from developing countries and seen all of that. I was just really interested in what else I could do to be of service. And I saw this group teaching mindfulness to kids in schools. And I got really excited about that. After checking out a bunch of other nonprofits, I thought I could really help them. So I volunteered for a while and then made the shift and jumped into the nonprofit space and did that for 7 years, ran that organization with some other folks, and then met Tristan in the course of that work, and now co-founded Center for Humane Technology with Tristan Harris and Isa Raskin, and now have been doing that for more than 7 years. So it's been really interesting and kind of an interesting journey, and my life the different threads of my life have woven together in a very interesting way.
That's amazing. Can you just provide, I know Scott's going to jump in here, but I'm so curious. We've met Tristan and Azza at AI for Good in Geneva, had a few calls with you. Like, what was that conversation? Like, I mean, you knew each other through Silicon Valley at some point, I'm sure, or just your network brought you together.
Actually, I met Tristan at a Wisdom 2.0 event. So there's this kind of conference that tries to bring together Silicon Valley and sort of mindfulness folks in the same place. And there was some small sub event where I met Tristan, and I just saw him as an earnest guy who was trying to talk about this problem with the attention economy. And I did not fully understand all of the implications for democracy, for the breakdown of truth, all of that stuff that he saw already back then. He had actually been talking about that for a few years at the time. And so I saw him. And then a few years later, I happened to ping him. I was kind of trying to live a quiet life. I pinged him. I said, "Hey, what's up, man?" And he said, "Oh, I was just on 60 Minutes. I could use your help. There's a lot of energy, right? I could use your help organizing it." And so then I volunteered, kind of joined the Slack group and tried to help out. And then it became so clear to me that going from volunteers to having an organization, and many of you listening will really resonate with this, right? You need a team that is driven by a mission. Mm-hmm. And you all work together and you say, okay, I'm gonna dedicate my time and my life to doing this. And then one of Tristan's close friends is Raskin. His father led the Macintosh project, the original Macintosh project. And so it was really interesting, right? He said, "Hey, you're really going to like Asa." And then Asa was kind of away on a trip, and he came back in a few months, and we met, and we got along very well. And we were just trying to say, well, how do we catalyze all of this energy? And I felt very strongly that building an organization was the right path, because otherwise Tristan was sort of going around with his backpack from place to place and speaking, very convincing, but there's no support, right, to follow up on all of the leads and all of the excitement that he leaves in his wake, right? So that's kind of how CHT came to be. And now we are a collection of technologists and policy experts and communicators. And we really focus on transforming the incentive structure, right? The incentives that drive technology, from social media to artificial intelligence. We began our work with social media, and we saw a lot of bad things play out, right? Because of the misaligned incentives there. Mm-hmm. And especially this idea of engagement-based, advertising-driven business models. It's a terrible combination. And unfortunately, now with artificial intelligence, we're seeing some misaligned incentives again, right? And so the goal is let's do better this time, because last time, I don't think it turned out very well.
Agreed.
And the messages that you and your co-founders have been putting out were in the social dilemma, right? For anyone who's watched that's the work that's been pushing this out. You also have your undivided attention. So while we know, obviously, CHT, we've been following you guys again for a while, there may be others that have seen the impact of what you do, but maybe haven't made that connection. So I just want to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning. The Social Dilemma was a Netflix documentary, and we got really lucky, right? Our work was centered in that film. And because of a combination of things, including COVID, that film reached 100 million plus people, which is astonishing, right? Nobody predicted that, but the conditions were just right. Everyone was stuck at home. People were deeply concerned about their children and what was happening with social media, because a lot of kids ended up online much earlier than their parents had intended because of COVID. And then at the time, Netflix was really the dominant platform. And so it just exploded. It went super viral. Everybody shared it. Lots of celebrities were saying, "You got to check this out." And so it just made the rounds. And that film helped to set the conditions for many other downstream moves. When there's alignment, there's kind of a cultural sense that, hey, there's a problem with this technology. It's a lot easier for policymakers to act out. It's a lot easier for parents, right, to act, right, to say, you wouldn't be the weird one at your PTA. Now you're part of the majority, right? When you say, hey, I'm really concerned about the effect of smartphones on my kid, you're with everybody, right? Now everyone gets that. It's kind of common knowledge. And so these kinds of broad media artifacts set the stage for a lot of downstream moves. And that's part of what we do. And you also mentioned our podcast, Your Undivided Attention, which has, I believe, 25 million plus downloads. A lot of people check it out.
We're
every
almost
2
there.
weeks.
We're close. We're
Yeah.
close.
Yeah, right behind you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's a big milestone.
Far from
right?
it. We're probably at 25, so we've got a ways to go.
Well, we've been very lucky with that, and we pay a lot of attention to the topics, the choice of topics, and the way we structure the episodes to try and make each episode interesting but also educational. So I highly encourage anyone who's interested in these topics of sort of technology and society and human nature and how all those things intersect. Please check it out. I think you'll
Yeah,
really
absolutely. And we'll put these links in the show notes. I mean, if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, watch The Social Dilemma. I've shared often on this podcast that my favorite podcast to listen to, and I've shared this with you, Randy, as well. And I have several friends that run podcasts which take offense to this, but Your Undivided Attention just speaks to my heart and my curiosity about the future. It also is just a really well produced and solid crystal ball, equating to what we've already seen with social media. And we talk about this. And the part that I quote from The Social Dilemma is this race to the bottom of the brainstem, that algorithms don't just operate on a whim by their own accord. They're essentially programmed with a unique and specific purpose to gain your attention, and they get rewarded when they get your attention. And if they don't get your attention, they try something new. And then it was another, I don't know what you call it, a webinar documentary / called The AI Dilemma, which I think came out maybe 2023, which and Tristan were talking to an audience in an auditorium and said, this is no longer a race to the bottom of the brainstem, it's a race to intimacy. And that's something that really made the hair on my neck stand up, because this race to intimacy was something that we think about in the nonprofit sector, this linkage between the heart and the wallet, that nonprofits since the beginning really understood the connection between the heart and the wallet. And I think most nonprofit tiers believe that that is something that's unique to them, that the private sector doesn't understand that linkage. And of course, Tristan and Asa were not speaking to nonprofit professionals in that auditorium. They were speaking to general public and academics and corporate leaders. And you're like, wow, this is really, I mean, only a few years had passed, like 2 or 3 years had passed since The Social Dilemma to The AI Dilemma. And we'd moved from this race to the bottom of the brainstem to a race to intimacy. And that really, really caught my attention and probably inspired this movement, fundraising AI, probably more than anything. That idea that nonprofits are no longer in the business of raising money. They're in the business of connection, that we live in the attention economy, and the currency in the attention economy is connection. So thank you for all of that work that you do, for seeing that early on, for convincing them that they needed structure, because you have just blossomed as an organization and providing so much wisdom and foresight to our sector. When we're thinking about, we have the benefit of looking at social media and some of the downstream, I mean, definitely there's some positives, but net positive, maybe that's a conversation for another day. A lot of downstream effects and unintended consequences. Where are we at today in AI? So this like AI situation, similar in that it's promising, creates efficiency and creativity and all these things. But what are those big questions that we're looking at today? And I know you're probably less concerned with today than you are tomorrow and the next day and the next day at the Center for Humane Technology, where you're projecting out. So what is the current AI situation? How are you thinking about the future?
Well, first of all, it's happening so fast. So the distinction between today and tomorrow starts to become much smaller, because everything is just unfolding at a pace we have never seen before. And these technologies are fantastic at text and images and audio and video. And we all know that, right? Of course, it has some challenges with accuracy and reliability and transparency, right? We don't always understand exactly why it's doing what it's doing. But in many cases, it's starting to become more and more useful. And actually, each month, you can see, even with the most popular technologies like ChatGPT or Claude, there are improvements that are going on behind the scenes all the time. Every month, they're quietly getting better, even if there isn't a lot of fanfare around that. But really, also, I just wanted to mention there are big questions, right, about how the training process works, what data is used in that training process, copyrights, and what you're allowed to use, right, to kind of build this intelligence. And that's going to play out in some very complex ways, a lot of legal questions beyond the scope of now, but I just want to name them.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest thing that I want people to keep in mind is that this is about automation, right? This is about automation technology. And with every generation, there's sort of more and more automation that's come, like the computer enabled all sorts of automation already. But now artificial intelligence that's becoming more and more general purpose, right? More flexible, able to do a lot of different things, combined with robotics that is also moving from very narrow specialization to more and more general capability. This combination is about the entire $105 trillion global economy, nothing less. So sometimes people get sort of confused about it, or they think, hey, this is about chatbots, or this is about deepfakes, right? And actually, if you look at what the companies are really focused on, like in the boardrooms, the prize is the whole thing. A small number of companies, right? The power is likely to concentrate in a big way because there are all of these economies of scale, right? And barriers to entry to join, to build these giant data centers, right? Just recently, we saw 2 companies want to build $125 billion data centers. So when you look at that scale, very few people can even participate in that conversation. So a small number of companies are aiming to basically be the core technology that drives everything, right? From farming technology to internet technologies to banking to intimacy and relationships, all the stuff. So that's what's at stake.
It's interesting you bring that up because, I mean, in our conversations, when Nathan and I are talking to nonprofits, we always have to, like you said, chatbots are the thing, right? It's ChatGPT, it's Anthropic, it's all those that have been out for the past 2 years. And that is what's become like the Kleenex of AI. If you're referring
it's the
to
first
AI,
content. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Like we have to remind people that, well, there's predictive before this. Predictive has been going on behind the scenes and like the social dilemma for bad, but has also done plenty of good. But robotics is the next wave and automation is the next wave. And for nonprofits, that seems so far out of the, we don't even have to work. That's Jetson world, right? Like we're not going to have to think about that. So
that's right.
I mean, tying that to your background, when I think about like a Venn diagram of your background, you have seeing from a very young age the benefits that technology can provide us, but then also seeing how you need to put priority on your mental health because what happens if you don't, and then also putting together a nonprofit at a young age. Like this is your wheelhouse above all else. So how do you see nonprofits playing a role in here? What is it that we can do or should be aware of as robotics automation is coming down the pike, but to a whole different sector compared to us?
Yeah, I mean, before diving into that, I just want to set up one kind of top level principle, which is people tend to think of these technologies as, oh, we'll have some good stuff and some bad stuff, and we'll figure it out. But I think a better way of thinking about it is to ask, how do we make sure that we roll out these new technologies, right, artificial intelligence and robotics, in a way that doesn't damage the things we depend on? Right? Because it's not equal. Not all harms are equal to the benefits. The order matters. And there are some checkpoints we have to pass. So things like, hey, can we avoid catastrophic inequality? Can we make sure that democracy functions effectively? Can we make sure we build shared understanding so we can have productive conversations with each other and solve problems? Can we make sure our ecosystems don't fail us because we're extracting too fast because we've now automated everything so much that the rate of extraction is much faster than the rate of regeneration? Right? That's another example. Or people aren't haunted by deep fakes, right? There are all these terrible things happening, right, in schools and to women, right? Very much women bear the brunt of deep fakes. Elections, right? We can't tell what's true or false, what to trust in a politician. Old people aren't exploited as they age. These are the kinds of questions, you don't hear these that much, right? You might notice that
Right.
most of the conversations around artificial intelligence tends not to go in these directions. People tend to not ask those. So that's why I'm saying them now, because I think it's actually one of the things we can all do is to make sure we recenter those kinds of questions.
Mhm.
And then to get to your question, right? I think a lot of times nonprofits are the hands that catch people when they fall through the gaps, right? We've got companies, their job is to build new stuff and sort of maximize revenue or maximize profit. And there's sort of, they compete inside a set of rules. When those rules are reasonable, like that competition can work really well, right? And deliver better products to consumers. That's the idea, right? That's the basic idea. But what happens is any company is naturally going to operate at the edge of the rules because that's sort of how you maximize those profits. And when you have technologies that are changing so quickly, right? Everything is changing, and the rules adapt very slowly, right? Because of course it takes effort to get people aligned and pass laws, and there's polarization that blocks, then there's lobbying groups that block, right? And so it's sort of very hard to get the rules to keep up in a way that's productive, where you still have the right kinds of competition to build good products, and you protect the things you care about, right? You protect the minds of children, the development of children, you protect security, you protect democracy, you protect our ecosystems that we rely on, right? All of those things. So I think in this situation, a lot of people are going to fall through the cracks, because I think automation technology by definition produces some really big questions, right? When we start to get good at automating, by definition, that means people are left behind. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think just to get a little clearer on that, this generation of technology, right? If you look at that like GPT-4 level, Claude 3.5 level technology, it's very good, but it's still not reliable enough. It's not accurate enough. You can't reliably leave it to do a set of, if you say, hey, perform these following 10 steps for me, it will kind of fall on its face about step 3 or 4. It won't be able to do the full sequence. But, and there's also weaknesses in reasoning and things like that. But when we have the next generation, which is coming very, very soon, a lot of those thresholds will be exceeded. And so you don't have to get to some kind of perfect super general intelligence or complete artificial general intelligence that people tend to kind of latch on to. All you need is to exceed certain thresholds where you can reliably automate, where you can reliably give tasks to these technologies, and they'll do it. Already there are many examples where this works. I report on this, right? I do briefings for our team and for our partners, and we track this stuff. So all the time there are new developments. And I think when this next generation comes along, which again, very soon, next few months, if not sooner, many, many people will be affected. And suddenly you'll start to see like hundreds of millions of people affected by these technologies, right, around the world. So now the nonprofit sector, right, becomes a really important factor, because the companies aren't going to solve the problem. Government will solve some of it, but the nonprofit sector is there to catch the rest.
The reasons why the nonprofit sector exists, right? And if those things will be exacerbated or accelerated, the need for the nonprofit sector to address those things is more paramount than ever. And I worry that the nonprofit sector is not equipped by even not using the tools or even understanding the tools to address those inherent increases in or increases in inequality or inequity, all of those types of things. So I thank you for bringing that up and kind of shedding light on that. And I also, as you were reflecting on like, oh, this is coming soon, the next generation, I think many people vastly misread how quick future generation means. So when they hear it's like, oh, the next evolution of AI, automatically in their head probably go to, oh, 5 years from now, it's like, oh, it's going to be like another 10 years. And I'm glad you clarified of like months, if not weeks, because some of the fundamental challenges around reasoning are already being solved. And this happens at this exponential race or exponential pace because AI is being used to train AI, which means I believe that the nonprofit sector needs to lean in to listen to people like you and the work of Center for Humane Technology to be equipped so that they can even begin to potentially understand what's at stake and then be equipped to address some of those things. I feel like if you're trying to fight
right.
fire with a squirt gun, like it's just never going to work. I mean, while this technology has tremendous power for
No,
good, it won't come without understanding what it's being used for and how to use it well.
that's right. And part of the exercise, which is what we are always doing, is you have to map the system and you have to figure out where the intervention points are, right? Where is there leverage? Disproportionate leverage, where a small move can have a disproportionate impact. And so that's sort of beyond the scope of this conversation. But in my talk, I will try to give a glimpse of kind of how you approach that. But for the people who are listening, who are at different nonprofits that do different types of work, I just wanted to mention a few ways that you can help right now. So one is if you work on poverty or inequality, right? Any of these kinds of issues, the impact on jobs, economic system adaptations that are needed for an AI-powered future, impacts on bias and discrimination, right? Disproportionate impacts. That's a huge area. If you work in democracy or civil society, there's all kinds of projects, right, about citizen assemblies, deliberative democracy. How can you get voices to come together? Community and grassroots bridge building. Where can AI help with that? It turns out AI is really good to listen to a large number of voices and kind of synthesize, to group them, to cluster them, and kind of make sense of it in a way that we couldn't do before. There's questions about watermarking and sort of content. Where does content come from? How do you stamp something to say, hey, this is authentic, right? Questions like that. Nathan, you wanted to jump in?
No, I think that's actually for teeing that up because we're getting close to being at time. And I thought, what a great transition to, again, highlight the essence of your talk. And I can't remember if you picked an exact title yet. One of the talks I've heard you do before was on essentially understanding how we'll know, I'm paraphrasing, whether technology will serve humanity's best interest.
Yes.
If you could maybe just think as we close this up, give people just a glimpse. I think it's you've already given everyone a great glimpse of who you are and what you talk about, but as they tune in, what they should expect to learn in that.
Yeah. So in that talk, we'll kind of look at this whole situation. We'll look at how to analyze it, and I'll also give some tips because I know people are also very interested to know, hey, in my own work, what do I do? How do I make sense of this, right? And I'll give you just one example. It's one of the tips is take an iterative, collaborative, experimental approach, right, to these technologies, right? Learn with your team and share best practices. So a lot of teams, they don't actually have a plan or a person who's helping to keep up with the latest developments in the technology. And so if no one's looking at it, then obviously, right, you're not going to be able to compete by using these technologies wisely if you don't even know what's happening. So that means some kind of assigning someone to keep track of that and reporting and have some kind of process is actually a huge unlocking thing, right? It's not, it's sort of like a bread and butter thing, but it becomes actually quite interesting when you discuss with your colleagues about all the cool things that are happening. It's a fun conversation, but also will help you in the work that you do.
That's awesome. And I know we could listen to this for probably another hour, if not more.
Definitely more. For me, sign me up.
There's so much to say.
So much to say. I'm excited to have you join. Again, thanks for joining us today, but also joining the Global Summit. I know that there's going to be so much that people will be able to take away from you. We're going to put the links for everything we talked about in here. But again, just for those listening, where can they learn more about you, about your work?
Center for Humane Technology is at humanetech.com. So just check out the website. You can sign up for a newsletter there. You can learn about the podcast and start subscribing to that as well. I think those are the best next steps. If you haven't seen the social dilemma and the AI dilemma, I highly recommend both of them. So check those out too.
And hopefully with all your work, these are the last dilemmas and we won't have to have a third one.
That's right. We're done with dilemmas. Yeah, it's work, but you got to give it your best. And I think that's all we're really asking, is for everyone to think about, understand the problem well, think about how you can help, and then let's go do it. Do what you can, and let's see what it adds up to. I think it's a lot.
Our missions are so aligned. Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for all the work you're doing. You guys are doing an incredible job. Again, thanks for joining us today. I know people are going to just get so much from this conversation. For those listening, thanks for listening. Thanks for being with us another week. One day we'll get to 25 million downloads, but probably maybe episode 40 or 50. But share with your friends, subscribe. If you didn't like it, still subscribe. Just don't tell anyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.